My sister Hira had always been the kind of person who needed the world to watch her in order to breathe. If there were two spots in the light, she made sure she stood in both of them. I used to think it was harmless confidence, the usual competition between siblings. I didn't realize then that what she carried wasn't confidence at all. It was hunger, sharp, bright, and endlessly consuming. The evening of her engagement, our house looked like it had been wrapped in celebration. Strings of lights curled around the walls, soft music floated from the speakers, and every corner smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Relatives laughed loudly as though sound itself proved happiness. I stood quietly by the staircase, half-shadowed, watching everything happen the way people watch move is there not part of. Hira moved through the guests in a silver dress that caught every light in the room. She smiled the way queens must smile after winning kingdoms. Beside her stood Armin, her fiancé, tall, well-spoken, with a polite charm that made people instantly like him. But her pride that night wasn't really about him. It glowed deeper, brighter, and every time she spoke, it appeared again in her voice. My fiancé's dad is a federal judge, she repeated, almost singing the words. Every single time she said it, people looked more impressed. They whispered about power, influence, respect, doors opening, futures secured. I watched her soak in their admiration, as if it were sunlight. But my heart did not admire, it remembered, because I knew that federal judge, I knew the courtroom where his voice echoed. I knew the way he looked at me when I stood in front of him, a trembling girl asking for protection no one wanted to give. I remembered the cold bench, the heavy silence, the sound of paper being shuffled, as if my life were just another file. He had dismissed my case. He had ruled my scars insufficient evidence. And now he was to become my sister's father-in-law. Hira knew all of this. She had known it before she accepted the proposal. She had looked at me afterward with soft eyes and poison in her tone when she said, "Please don't ruin this for me." That was when the first crack formed inside my chest. I passed sweets, poured drinks, smiled when expected. No one noticed that my hands were shaking. But inside me, something quiet had awakened, not anger, not hatred, but a slow rising understanding. Revenge does not always come with fire. Sometimes it arrives silently, sits beside you and waits. And that night it had finally found me. The engagement dinner swelled with noise, the kind of noise people make when they are trying too hard to be happy. Laughter chimed against glass, conversations overlapped, and the chandelier scattered light like broken stars across the hall. Waiters walked around with silver trays, and every guest seemed dressed in their best version of importance. I stood near the corner of the room, invisible by choice, watching the celebration like someone studying a storm they already know is coming. Then the judge arrived. He didn't just enter, he shifted the air. People straightened when they saw him. Shoulders pulled back, smiles widened, voices softened into respect. His presence worked like gravity. Conversations bent toward him. He was tall, his hair touched with dignified gray, his suit perfectly measured, as if authority itself had been stitched into the fabric. And yet, when his eyes met mine, all that power cracked. He recognized me. For a heartbeat, the hall dissolved. There were no lights, no guests, no laughter. There was only the echo of a courtroom, the memory of wooden benches, the sound of my own voice trembling as I spoke my truth, and the sound of his voice dismissing it. His smile faltered. Something tightened in his jaw. It was not anger. It was memory. He remembered my name without saying it. He remembered my tears, my words, the way I had clutched the edge of the witness stand like it could save me. He remembered the case he closed like a file instead of a life. My sister followed his gaze, confused at first, then slowly alarmed as realization unfolded in her expression. Her fingers tightened around Armin's arm. She had hoped the past would stay buried. She had hoped I would stay silent. Silence has sharp edges. The judge greeted my parents politely, praised the decorations, complimented the arrangements, all with a strained attempt at normalcy. Then he turned toward me, like a man walking toward a mirror he did not want to face. "You look familiar," he said carefully. "Courtroom 3B. I answered softly, 18 months ago. The words landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. Color drained from his face, my mother froze, my father swallowed. Hira stared at me as if the ground had tilted beneath her. Armin looked between us, lost, unaware that the story of his life had just changed direction. The judge breathed out slowly, the way people do when they realize the past doesn't stay obedient. "May we speak privately?" he asked. I nodded. For the first time, I wasn't the girl pleading in front of him. I was the one he had to follow. The study room was quieter than the hall outside, yet the silence inside it felt heavier than all the laughter in the world. The door clicked behind us, shutting out music, guests, and the bright lie of celebration. Only two people remained now, not a judge and a witness, not a symbol of power and a pleading girl, just two human beings tangled in a past neither of us could undo. He did not sit at first. He stood there, unmoving, as though the furniture itself might judge him if he rested. Finally, he sank into the chair across from me, shoulders less straight than they had been moments ago. Without the courtroom, without the robe, his authority looked fragile, like glass pretending to be stone. "I remember your case," he said at last. Those 4 words should have comforted me. They did not. They simply reopened a door that had never fully closed. "I know you do," I replied, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been when I had stood trembling before his bench. He cleared his throat, seeking refuge in logic. I ruled based on what was presented to me. There wasn't enough evidence. I finished for him, my eyes not leaving his. There wasn't enough because the evidence was destroyed, the messages deleted, the witnesses persuaded. Everything that could have proven my truth was made to disappear very carefully, very expensively. He said nothing. His silence wasn't power anymore, it was guilt, and while that happened, I continued quietly. "You looked at me and decided my pain was exaggeration. You used the word inconsistent. You said I seemed emotional." He winced like the word itself had cut him. He tried again, softer this time. "I didn't know about all of that." "No," I said, "you didn't want to know." The difference hung between us. I told him about the sleepless nights, the whispered threats, the way fear slowly becomes a second skin. I spoke of how my parents told me to keep quiet for the family's reputation. I told him how my sister, the girl whose engagement the house was celebrating tonight, urged everyone to pretend nothing had happened, to erase me for the sake of convenience. "And now," I added, "that same sister plans to marry into your powerful family, into your world of silence." He finally looked old, not by age but by the weight of realization. "If this comes out," he murmured, "it will damage many lives." I smiled without warmth. It already damaged one. He swallowed. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, I thought about all the things revenge stories promise: public humiliation, destruction, loud justice. But my heart had learned something heavier and calmer. "I want you to remember me," I said, "not as a file, not as a case, as a person you failed." He closed his eyes. Justice didn't thunder that night. It whispered, and this time it whispered in his ear. When I stepped back into the glowing hall, it felt different than before. The music still played, the lights still shimmered, the guests still laughed, but beneath it all, I felt the subtle crack in the surface. Sometimes nothing changes to the eye, and yet everything has shifted underneath, like the ground quietly moving before an earthquake. I found Armin standing on the balcony again, his back to the crowd, staring out at the city lights as if answers were hidden between them. He turned when he heard my footsteps, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His innocence, his unawareness, almost made my chest ache. "Can we talk?" I asked. He nodded without hesitation. So I told him, not with drama, not with blame, not with tears, just raw, unembellished truth. I told him about the person who hurt me. I told him how power silenced witnesses and erased proof. I told him how my case collapsed not because I lied, but because influence is louder than justice. I told him how his father sat high above me on the bench and chose to believe a clean story instead of a messy reality. I did not add bitterness. The truth did not need it. With every word, his expression changed: confusion, disbelief, pain, and finally something that looked like grief for a world he had never questioned. His hands trembled slightly against the railing. "My father dismissed you," he whispered, He dismissed more than me, I said gently. He dismissed the idea that my suffering mattered. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the weight in his chest needed darkness to settle. When he opened them again, the boy-like softness was gone. In its place stood a man who had suddenly realized that the person he admired was built partially of shadows. He thanked me, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet word spoken like a promise, and walked back inside. I did not follow. I watched through the glass as he found my sister. I watched the conversation unfold, their faces shifting, smiles fading, reality sinking in layer by layer. There was no shouting, no broken engagement announcement, no crowd reacting in shock, just honesty arriving and staying. The judge avoided my gaze the rest of the evening, not with arrogance, but with shame that finally learned how to feel. My sister didn't gloat anymore. Her eyes searched mine not for permission, but for understanding she knew she no longer deserved. And me, I went to my room later with a strange lightness in my chest. Nothing about my past had been erased. The scars remained, quiet witnesses beneath my skin, but something vital had changed. I was no longer the girl begging to be believed. I became the truth no one could unlearn. That was my revenge, not destruction, not scandal, not fire. Just recognition, and sometimes that is the sweetest justice of all.